Hello my friends. Early Christians sometimes faced persecution and even death for their beliefs. Many of them were tortured. This video contains 10 of the most bizarre and painful torture methods that Christians were subjected to in ancient times during the early Middle Ages. Much of this information has been drawn from John Foxe's Book of Martyrs and has been confirmed elsewhere. Stay tuned. 10. Cooked to death. Saint Lawrence of Rome is better known for the manner of his death than for his ministry in life. When a Roman governor demanded that the tithes of the Catholic Church be handed over to the Roman state, Lawrence brought his poor subjects, whom he stated were tithes, where they were given money for food. The angry governor ordered metal plates to be placed over a layer of coal and heated until they became red hot. Lawrence was then tied up and placed naked on them, face up. His flesh sizzled, smoked, and burned black, but Lawrence made no protest, nor asked the governor for forgiveness. Finally he called out in a clear voice, "I'm done on this side. Turn me over and eat." He is now the patron saint of cooks. It was discovered that Peter, a eunuch from the house of Diocletian, was a Christian and cooked in the same way as Lawrence. 9. Dragged to death. Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, founded the Christian church in Alexandria and preached to the masses about the need to abandon their Egyptian gods and goddesses. It is not clear how long he was able to continue this, but he converted many before 68 AD, when an angry mob tied a rope around his neck and dragged him through the streets behind a chariot for 2 days without interruption. The dragging continued even after his death until his bones became visible. According to some sources, Hippolytus of Rome, an elder under Pope Pontian, was dragged to his death behind a wild horse on the island of Sardinia. He is now the patron saint of horses. In 257, Saturninus of Toulouse was dragged behind a bull around the city until the bull was chased down a flight of stone steps and Saturninus' brains were smashed from his skull. Julian the Apostate succeeded Constantius II, who succeeded his father Constantine the Great, in 361. Julian brought pagan religions back into the empire and persecuted Christians are awful. Within 2 years, he ordered that they be searched and dragged to death in every city and along the caravan routes throughout Palestine. 8. Skinned. The removal of skin is so painful that victims always lose consciousness several times during torture. To prevent this from happening, they were usually hung upside down until the excess blood flow to their brains forced them to remain conscious. The skin is not easy to remove, and executioners rarely make the effort to remove it in one piece unless they want to get the trophy. Usually, the skin is cut into slices, and then each slice is peeled from the body with the help of a knife. Often, the skin was thrown into the fire or to animals, or dangled before the eyes of the victim. Thus Bartholomew, one of the 12 apostles, was killed by locals in Armenia, into whose language he translated the Gospel of Matthew. The Armenians refused to give up their idols and executed Bartholomew by crucifying him upside down and flaying his skin. 7. It is sewn into hides and eaten by dogs. This torture was invented by Nero himself, not only to cause pain to Christians, but also to entertain him and his guests. Nero was rumored to have crucified Christians on trees in his gardens, covered them in wax, and lit them on fire to fuel his night walks. He clearly didn't mind the stench. He ordered others to sew their skins. Any large animal was skinned, and the prepared skin was sewn around the victim except for the head, hands, and feet. Then the predatory dogs were released. The victim can only walk around on all fours like a crab. It was said that Nero laughed loudly when the dogs gnawed the skin like bones. Julian of Antioch was tortured daily for an entire year and paraded before crowds in every city in Cilicia, a southern coastal region in what is now Turkey. It was then sewn into a hide filled with scorpions and thrown into the Aegean Sea. He was said to have cruised all the way across the Mediterranean to Alexandria, Egypt. 6. Starved to death. Emperor Decius ruled from 249 to 251, when he was killed at the Battle of Abritus in Bulgaria. During his short reign, he built a temple at Ephesus and required all Christians to sacrifice for the good of the emperor, not for the emperor, as that would attribute divinity to Decius, who was still alive. This was against Roman law, but Christians largely considered any such sacrifice inconsistent with their faith and refused to do so, even when they were warned that they would be tortured to death. Pope Fabian himself was beheaded over the affair. The following year, it was discovered that 7 of Decius's best soldiers, Constantine, Dionysius, Malchus, Marcian, Maximian, Ioannis, and Sir Ion, were converts to Christianity. Decius tried to bribe them to return to the Roman faith by giving them an extended vacation during his absence. They fled the area and hid in a cave. Upon Decius's return, he was told of their whereabouts and the cave was sealed. All 7 died of starvation or dehydration. There is a legend, similar to Rip Van Winkle, that these 7 men fell asleep and woke up 360 years later, came out of the cave and startled the people in the city. 5. Boiled to death. Boiling water causes almost immediate first-degree burns and will cause third-degree burns 10 minutes later. Eventually, the flesh will slough off deep into the muscle, and death is usually marked by the water turning red when it finally penetrates the blood vessels. Tradition has it that John the Apostle, who wrote the Gospel of John, escaped unharmed after being boiled in an oil cauldron, after which he was banished to the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. In 222, a woman named Cecilia, possibly Saint Cecilia, was boiled in a bathtub. On a bed of coal for a day and a half, after turning her husband and brother. They were beheaded, as was the captain who led them to their death, because he converted to Islam due to the courage of the victims. After Cecilia was pulled alive from the tub, she is said to have sung a song of praise to God, which is why she is the patron saint of music. Then she was beheaded. This inspired the second tale of the nun in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. 4. Auto-Inquisition de fe. By the 13th century, everyone was anticipating the Spanish Inquisition. The Church set up Inquisition in every country in Western Europe, but the Spanish were the most brutal and fearsome. Anyone found guilty of even reading the Bible in their mother tongue was tried, convicted, and often executed. The execution and torture ceremony was called the auto de fe, or act of faith. The Inquisition was required to shed no blood during torture, but this requirement was usually ignored. The most common method was to strip the victim to his underwear and place his face on a raised platform. Thin ropes were passed through the holes and wrapped around the ends, then pulled so tightly that they cut through the victim's flesh to the bone. If no confession is made, the process is repeated up to 4 times. If this yields no confession, the next stage involves folding the arms back behind the victim with the palms facing out, and then the arms are tied to a lever that brings them closer and closer until the backs of the hands touch. This caused both shoulders to be torn from their sockets with the pressure causing blood to gush from the mouth. The surgeon then fitted the joints and sentenced the victim to 2 months in prison to recover. After 2 months, the final torture involved tying a heavy chain around the body with both ends tied to a winch. The arms were held straight out to the sides and the chain was passed around the wrists. They were then tightened like a tourniquet until the shoulders and wrists were dislocated. Then the joints were reset, and the torture was immediately carried out again. If the victim has not yet confessed, he or she is sent to be burned at the stake. If he did so, he would be put in prison for another month or 2, then released as a cripple. 3. Ground to death in a mill. Under Maximian's rule, Saint Victor Maurus suffered perhaps the most painful death of all. He secretly ministered to his parishioners in Milan until about 303, when he was discovered and immediately dragged through the streets behind a horse while crowds stripped and beat him, then demanded that he recant. It was rejected and placed on a shelf for a day, during which he prayed to God to be patient. He was then imprisoned, and immediately transferred 3 of his guards. When Maximian heard this, he ordered the guards to be beheaded, so he beat Victor again, while the executioners brutally beat him with clubs. He was ordered to retreat and refused a 3rd time. Maximian built a Roman altar and ordered Victor to sacrifice incense on it to Jupiter. This angered Victor, who kicked the altar. Maximian strictly ordered the offending foot to be cut off, after which Victor was thrown into a stone mill used to grind wheat into flour, and the executioners ground him to death. 2. Broken steering wheel. The breaking wheel is an extremely painful torture method in which the victim is tied to the side of a flat wheel on the ground. One of 2 methods was then used: either the executioner used a sledgehammer to smash every organ in the body, or the wheel was made to turn in cross-section with others, like gears, so that the body of the victim was crushed between them. No bone or part of bone, except the torso and head, was spared to keep the victim alive. Sometimes the genitals were smashed. The victim was then left in this state to die from exposure, loss of blood, or be eaten by birds and ants. This was the fate of a man called Peter in Lampsacus of Mysia, now Lapsiki in Turkey, around the year 250. He was martyred along with 3 others, Paul, Andrew, and Dionysia. Dionysia was condemned to be raped to death, but tradition says she was saved by an angel and the 3 would-be rapists fled in fear. Then she escaped from prison, but she wanted to be martyred like her friends and allowed the authorities to recapture her. She was beheaded, and Paul and Andrew were stoned. Peter was beaten to the wheel and then beheaded. 1. For pigs to eat their entrails. In 363, during the reign of Julian the Apostate, Saint Mark was bishop of Arethusa, a town near modern Apamea, Syria. Julian ordered Marcus to repair a dilapidated pagan temple, but Marcus destroyed it instead, then fled the city. He soon realized that his Christian followers would pay the price for what he had done if he did not return, and so he did. The angry townspeople dragged him through the streets, stripped him naked, stabbed him all over his body with pencils and quills, then slathered him with honey and hung him in a basket in the town square, where wasps and bees streamed into town. Basket and eat him. Many of his followers were discovered and dragged away by the mob, who tore out their stomachs with their bare hands. The corn was packed into their bellies and the pigs were placed on them. The pigs ate the corn and its intestines. These are the worst ways in the ancient era. Leave us your comment about any of the tortures that left you concerned. At the end of the video, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell to be notified of video events. See you.